I'll make sure. Right on. So, Rod, welcome to the show, man. I'm really stoked you're willing to share your wisdom today, chat with me, share your
Hey,
story, and yeah, I'm really excited. So, thank you very much for being
hey,
here.
it's great to be here, Glenn. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So, just so kind of everybody can get aware or their heads wrapped around your story, take
Okay.
us through your timeline from kind of post-secondary era,
Wow.
like that time
Okay.
frame.
Sure.
Yeah, sending
Okay.
it back, I'm sure, and
Okay.
then we can
Okay.
kind of go full circle. That's how I
Okay.
like to do it, and I think it's
Okay.
the best way to.
Okay. We'll reel backwards then. Okay.
Yeah.
I went to York University and I did a major in theater, got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater, and did a minor in creative writing. And when I graduated from York, so I stayed in Toronto
Mm-hmm.
and knew at that time I wanted to be an actor. So I, did a lot of odd jobs to pay the bills, and I was living right down in the annex on a street called Palmerston Boulevard, which it was kind of my Hemingway's movable feast at that time period, right? And when it was alive, it was vibrant. None of us had any money, didn't
Yeah.
matter, right? We had this rule that you wouldn't eat for 4 days, but on Friday night you'd go out and have a good meal, right?
Amazing.
You could live, right? And then whoever got a gig that week they'd pay for Friday night. So it was,
Perfect.
it was a good, it was great. It was like a really, really good way to do it. So I was enjoying my life and the struggles and all. And I worked in a bookstore, children's bookstore. I became an agent for a couple of years and I learned the business side of things while I acted. And then I started switching more in the directing
Mm-hmm.
and and started doing some shows. I wasn't getting paid yet because when I was like 23, 24 years old, you
Yeah.
have no cred yet. So you take on big
Uh,
projects for the experience. So I did that for a few years. And while I was at York, I'd met a guy who became my mentor, a man named Neil Freeman. And he was just starting doing work, going back and looking at the original manuscripts of William Shakespeare, the first folio.
mm-hmm.
And he was really passionate and he got me really excited. So I got this buzz on very early on to tackle these original scripts and try to see how I could bring the life in the present. So the point of that is
Interesting.
when I was in my later 20s, a new Stratford Festival was changing reigns of artistic directors. So I sent out this package
Mm.
of my ideas about some of the Shakespearean plays and what I've been doing. And I sent this package to the new artistic director at that time, David William, got an interview, met with him, and long and the short, I got hired on as an assistant director at the festival.
Oh,
And at
sick.
that time, I was the youngest AD they'd hired. So I did a year there. Then the following year, they had me back, and they had me be assistant director for their young company, where I would work with young actors my age
Mm-hmm.
and help them with tech. So that was great. And then when I finished that, that opened up a lot of teaching opportunities. I was teaching at Windsor,
Oh, I bet.
went to George Brown Theatre School, a bunch of theater schools teaching acting, Shakespeare, scene study, a lot of things. And meanwhile, I was doing a lot of freelance directing all over the
Mm.
place. Right, I was always on the road and being hired here and there, here and there, here and there, and had some success. And went down to the States and did some work. And then later in my later 30s, I ended up coming up on a guest contract to North Bay, Ontario, up to North Bay.
Oh, sweet.
And I've been in North Bay 24 years now, but it was entirely an accident. I never planned to be here. I did a show in the fall '98, and it went really, really well. And there was a lot of talk by some of the actors in that show saying, there'd been this desire to have professional theater in North Bay. It never had happened. And I was looking for a change. Well, just the price of parking in Toronto was little things like that. And I was up for a
Yeah.
change, right? I was
No,
always
for
on the
sure.
road. I had an adventuring spirit, and I wasn't tied down to anything. So I thought, okay, well, I'll give it I'll see if we can maybe set the seeds of getting a theater company going. So I
Nice.
began working on the idea, right? And through that, a businessman named Clyde Armstrong came on board, and it was his dream too. So he began taking me around to meeting some business people with
Uh,
this idea,
yeah.
and suddenly we had money for a line of credit, about $250,000. And
Amazing.
that never happens. We have great
No.
ideas, but there's never any money, and they always fall
Right.
down.
Yeah.
So I never thought this was going to happen. I said I'll be back in Toronto doing my thing in months, but
Mhm.
suddenly he had this commitment. And I thought, wow, this is going to happen. So I made the decision, and I packed up my stuff in Toronto. A buddy put all my stuff in the back of his pickup truck, and I moved to
Nice.
North Bay, and I couch surfed for a year till I found an apartment. and I started working on this new theater company. And then serendipitously, the opportunity opened up to teach a part-time course at the university.
Mhm.
And so that helped. So then I was able to pay the bills. And I did that for 6 years. And then in 2004, I was concerned that there was no actor training, proper training north of Toronto, nothing serving Northern Ontario at all.
Yeah, no,
No, nothing, right? So I
nothing you
went,
hear
I,
of for
I
sure.
went to the, I went to the then president, Barbara Taylor of Canada College, and I presented this idea, like, I think we should create a conservative acting studying program here in North Bay.
Mhm.
So she gave me the green light to research it, and so I studied, comparative programs at George Brown and Humber and the like, and
Yeah.
came back with my ideas. And then she said, "Okay, well now develop a curriculum."
A question
So
for you though. Sorry
yeah,
to, I just want to
yeah, yeah, yeah,
interject
yeah,
real quick.
yeah.
What was the demand? Like, how much of a demand was there for it? Like,
Well,
because we often, since we don't know, or
yeah,
if we
well,
don't know, we might think there isn't any. But what was the demand like? It sounds like there was quite a demand.
to my mind, there was, because I was seeing some talent in North Bay,
Nice.
and I know some of them were going off to different school, Ryerson, York, other schools, but they'd also said if there was a good program in this region,
Mhm.
they'd go to it. And I was also adjudicating theater festivals throughout the north, up in Timmins and Sault Ste. Marie and all
Oh,
around.
okay.
And occasionally it would come up in conversation, right?
Huh.
That that wish there was training up here. So that sort of was the bug that got me going with it.
Okay, interesting.
So I put the curriculum together, and then Canada submitted it to the ministry, and I'm doing sort of the Coles Notes versions of all this.
No,
And anyhow,
amazing.
long and the short was by December of 04, the program was approved. We opened our doors in the fall of 05 for our first class,
Yeah,
and now here it is 18 years later, and the program's still going.
amazing.
Uh, so I did that, and in 2009, I was the winner of TVO's Big Idea Best Lecturer competition for the province of Ontario. So that was a pretty big deal in my career, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
In terms of teaching. And then through
Interesting.
over this time, I'd written some plays, and I'd written
Mhm.
plays through my 30s, and it was 2011. And I had this idea, and I've always wanted to write a book, and we'll probably get into that a little later. But when I was
Mhm.
a kid, and I used to write, and anyhow, point being, I thought I really want to do this, and I've been waiting in on this. So I started working on a manuscript, and I submitted it to the Humber School for Writers back in 2012. It got accepted, and then I worked with a mentor on it, and eventually created my first novel, A Matter of Will.
Mhm.
Tried to sell it for 2 years, and it was like crickets, right? Nothing, right? Which
Yeah.
is a common story with writers in their first book. But at the same time, there was a new publishing house opening in Sudbury, Latitude 46 Publishing.
Mhm.
And so I sent it to them, and they jumped on it, and
Amazing.
they published it. It came out in the fall of 17. And then my second book, Kinmount, came out in the fall of 20, and it's done quite well, won some awards. And
Amazing.
then my latest, Grin Reaping, which came out this past June, is now out my latest short story collection. So now, over the past 6-7 years, I've been slowly transitioning into full-time writing, which is where I'm sort of landing now. So that is, in a nutshell, is kind of my resume in short.
Amazing. I love it. Now, for people who don't know, because always think I do know because I've heard the word been thrown
Yeah,
around a lot, but
yeah.
manuscript, for people who may not
Manuscript, yeah.
know,
Sure.
yeah. Can you
Manuscript,
define it?
yeah, surely. Manuscript is just your actual like document that you've created on your laptop, right?
Yeah.
That eventually will be the published novel or short story collection, right? So
Mhm.
it's the document, it's the Word document that you've created.
Oh, no kidding. So it's like
Yeah.
the raw, uncut, unedited,
Well, it no, it
ready to
is no.
go.
Well, by the time you send it into an editor at a publishing
Uh,
house, you've edited it a
right. You
lot.
want it to be good, I'm sure.
Yeah, writing is
Yeah.
rewriting. It's all about revision. The first
Writing and
draft
rewriting.
is usually garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oof.
you end up tossing about 60% of it, right? So
Yeah.
the first draft is just getting it down, and then the real refinement work comes in your subsequent writing
Yeah.
and
You
drafts.
pick
Yeah,
and choose what goes everywhere.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have a storytelling question I'm curious about, and I was
Sure.
inspired listening to you guys. I wanted to ask the panel.
Yeah.
I really want to ask you specifically this
Okay.
question.
Sure.
So because I'm into like filmmaking as a hobby and like storytelling, whether it be with the podcast or whether it be like
Yeah.
documenting myself going on certain different trips and adventures. There, when it comes to filming and movies, Hollywood has a 3-act structure that they have in place, right? The beginning, the middle, and the end, right? And like how the arc of the story transitions based on where it falls in the act. And I found it ruined a lot of movies when I did more research on this type of storytelling. But I was wondering if whenever it comes to writing novels or writing anything, whether it be theater or stuff like that, does everything kind of fall into a 3-act structure? Like obviously a beginning, middle, and end, but does everything fall into that? Or are there kind of ways in writing that you don't, or that go differently? Curious.
It's a good question. Okay, so with that structure you're describing, that is a traditional, straightforward narrative, right?
Yeah.
Linear narrative, working that way. So yes, I would say that is a common structure. I think I tend to work more in what I call a 5-act structure when I work my narrative, right? More of a 5-act.
Yeah.
That's sort of where I go. But that being said, there is work that I've read, and there's because it's that with different creative writers, like for example, Gary Barman, who was on that panel.
Yeah.
Gary Barman is just like, he's working up there on a tightrope without a net, and he's all over the place, and he's juggling ideas. So he treats structure like silly putty, and it's all over, right? So I think it as long as and I think as long as there's a logic, right? Like let's say you're writing a narrative and you're setting it whatever, past, present, future, or you're playing around with time or whatever that is. As long as you've created a logic for the world that you're exploring, and you hold true to that logic, the reader will go on the journey with you. Right. The reader will go on the journey. I believe that. At the same time, what's common, no matter what structure you're working in, is your work has to be clear. It's got to be polished, right? Right.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. I'm curious when it comes to that, because can you define your, like, how have you refined that the 5-act structure you've used?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah. Okay. So if I look at
for your style,
so I look at my latest, let's say my last novel, Kinmount, right?
Perfect.
So we start this and we lay in the groundwork, and right away there's an inciting incident that sets the plot going forward, right? Suddenly we've met the central character, but right out of the gate, there needs to be some kind of incident that happens that throws them into a situation, or that character into a situation where they've got obstacles coming at them and they've got to go on a journey of some kind.
Interesting. Right? Is that kind of your hook almost?
Yeah. Okay. It's gonna get the reader in right away. Like,
for sure.
You got to get him in right away, right?
Right.
So that happens, right?
Interesting.
And then while that's happening, you're also having a certain amount of exposition, which is all the setup, right? Going on, where you're meeting, in my case, other characters, you're laying in background, but you're doing it in such a way that it's still moving forward.
Right.
The reader may not consciously know that it's moving forward, but it has to always be moving forward, like, because you're pulling the reader along, right? Okay, to get them on board.
Yeah.
So that's sort of working. And then I'll have the next will be the next major obstacle that will happen to this character, right? We've had the early exposition with an inciting incident happening, it's building, and then we get the big obstacle number 1, bang, which then throws the character into jeopardy. And then we watch the character navigate that, right? And what happens, right? Okay. Then as that builds in my writing, then there's an even bigger obstacle that's going to come and knock this character. And through the course of it, the character, and you always ask the question, does the character change on their journey? Like, is it like, say, A Christmas Carol? Yes, Scrooge at the beginning is this, at the end he's the polar opposite.
For sure,
Is it about that? Or is it, the main character stays the same, but it's what happens to them, right?
Interesting.
Right? That depends on the story you're telling. So then I'll get to a place then where then I've got that they're fighting that next round of obstacles, right? Which will then lead into the climax of the story, right? Which is the ultimate obstacles coming and how that resolves itself, conflict resolved,
Hmm.
and then you have the sort of, denouement or the wind down afterwards,
Yeah.
right? Which just,
Interesting.
and that can vary depending on the book. One
Hmm.
thing I've discovered in my writing is that the denouement shouldn't be long, right? Because once you've hit the climax of the book, and the conflict's resolved in some
Hmm.
way, don't let that denouement drag on for like 6 more chapters, right?
Right.
It's just there to sort of, I realize now it's kind of like it's just there to bring the leaf kind of back down to the ground.
Okay. That's a good way to put it.
You know,
Interesting.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's cool though. I like that. Now, interesting, man. I'm gonna sit on that for sure. But what I'm curious about too, I'm sure you've read like when was better question. When was the first novel you read? Like you read? Or
When I was
what time
sure,
frame?
sure, sure, sure.
Yeah, I'm curious.
When I was a kid, so I'm thinking about like grade 5, 6, somewhere in
Mhm.
there. I
Oh
read
well.
the C.S. Lewis books, the Narnia books,
Oh yeah, okay.
right? So that would have been introduced to me. I read books by a writer named Jim Kilgard, who wrote adventure books like, Jack London, White Fang. That was exposed to
Hmm.
me when I was a kid. Um, Moving into high school is when I read Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
And then I was exposed in high school to starting to read like American literature, like, I read The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
I read Wuthering Heights, books that we had to read for high school, which I enjoyed. But then it's also in high school is where I discovered the work of J.D. Salinger,
Oh, sweet.
which really, really spoke to me. So that was the first, I would say that's the first author that I encountered
JD
that
Salinger.
spoke to me, and I
Yeah.
related to the characters, and I really got completely absorbed in that world.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's cool. Now with that though, I'm curious, what have you noticed and how has novels and literature changed over the course of the last, like, let's say 15, 20 years, ever
Well,
since the introduction of kind of the internet? And then I want to double down on a question about that, but I'm
sure. Well,
curious. We'll start
uh,
there.
sure. Well,
If you've
one thing,
noticed anything.
yeah, sure. Well, first off, language is always in flux, right? Language is
Right.
always evolving. It's not, it's like a river. And as we moved into the internet of the internet in that world, right, there's short form texting, there's short form. So that's informing writing, right? I don't know if it's informing attention spans, but I do think there'll be some publishers that say that books are slightly shorter now because of attention spans. That could be one person's argument. Could also be that they're shorter because printing costs are so expensive now. They got to print less paper. So it's a variety of things. But and
Amazing.
but I would say the biggest changes that are going on, and this is in the last,
Hmm.
4 or 5 years, with the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter, and LGBTQ and everything.
Yeah,
So you're
everything.
seeing everything, right? So right now there are more Indigenous writers, Canadian Indigenous writers, more Canadian Black writers, more Canadian writers of all diversities and
Hmm.
ethnicities, and gender, and choices, and they are right now, I would say, the dominant books in the market right now, because
Hmm.
that's the movement we're going forth, where
Interesting.
we're finally giving a platform for those voices, and
Right. It's like
they're finding,
trending almost,
yeah, and those
I
so, so,
guess.
so no, trending could be a word. I would say uh it's an
There's,
area where it's been long,
yeah.
it's about time it's happening, right, where everything's
Yeah.
opening up right now. And
Right.
so, and like anything, right, as pendulums shift and they move, and they eventually always
Hmm.
come settle back in the middle. So
Yeah.
eventually, um everything will rest, and I'm hoping that there'll be equality between all authors, and that's what we're moving towards, right? So everything's out there,
Amazing. Yeah.
and that's just like, it's like a smorgasbord for readers to pick. I can pick this, I can pick
That's
that. Look at
cool.
this, look at this, and there's room for everyone, right?
Hmm.
And it's the same thing, but it could be with music or films. I don't like that attitude as well. They're now stepping on my turf, and no one's stepping on anyone's turf. It's There's room for everyone,
Yeah,
and
100%.
right? And the more options that are available, the better that is for literature, the better it is for everything.
Right.
So
Right. I almost feel it creates more of a demand,
I think
right?
it does.
One,
Yeah.
like
And
100%.
yeah. And I think, you know, one can argue that there's like, what I think, well, I don't know who said this, but there's like 20 different stories. Like, you know, there's the quest story, there's the
Yeah.
whatever, right? So there's no one that's going to reinvent a new story in that sense. But what people
Right.
do reinvent is how you tell it.
Oh, for
It's
sure.
the telling of it and how they tell it. So every writer has a unique voice that's true to them. And that's one thing that's the journey on as you are a writer starting out or your movie is you start, the more you write, you when you find what your voice is, right? And there's an expression sometimes used about sticking to your lane, right? So when you find out
Mhm.
what's your lane, where do you fit? And there are some writers that are, you know, they can write every genre, and they do, and they dance all over, right? And then there are other writers that they find what their genre is, and that's what they stay in their lane with, right?
Mhm. Which one would you say you are?
At present,
Mhm.
I write literary humor satire.
Love it. Now, why?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, from a
Why
very
comedy for
well, yeah. First off,
overall scope?
on you know, on a bigger picture,
Mhm.
I think humor is a coping mechanism that we use to get by each day. It's the kind of
100%.
exchange we all have. If we didn't use humor, we'd all be jumping off bridges, right? It's a
Yeah.
way to make life more bearable.
Yeah.
I know that most things that happen to me, uh, I process through this comic filter I have, right?
Interesting.
And it's a way of kind of dealing with pain on the short term. It's a bit
Mhm.
like feeding my soul Pop Tarts, but it's not a way of avoiding pain. It's a way of dealing with pain, right?
Right in the present. Yeah.
Because comedy only is tragedy plus time, right? Tragedy with distance.
Whoa.
So you know something happens to you, and it's like, oh, it's awful in the moment.
Yeah, we can
But
laugh about it later.
yeah,
5 years when we're laughing all about. Yeah.
that's what comedy is, right? Because you
Right.
need that distance to make it happen. So
Whoa.
you know, and I think so. And then also is especially with writing satire, it's a great way to poke the bear. It's because that's laughing at something or someone who deserves to be laughed at, all right?
Mhm.
Like say Trump or something like that. They're
Oh,
figures
for sure.
deserve
Great example.
because they deserve to be pulled down off their pedestals. And
Yeah.
then as we as writers kind of have a responsibility to society to do that.
100%.
So, and I think where that began in me was very young because I was a quiet kid but I would be observed. I would watch a lot going around me, and I would see what I
Uh,
perceived. I would perceive what I would see as injustices, and
yeah.
I experienced some bullying too as a kid. So that was always there in me. So my way to kind of fight back was with humor
Just wit, eh?
and right and wit and
Ah,
writing, right,
amazing.
and that developed, right, that
Yeah.
evolved.
Oh, for sure.
But that was, and I reckon as more and more, you know, as I get older, I go back, yeah, that's how that was there. The seeds were there for that for me.
Mhm.
And then when I read other writers that I think, you know, Mordecai Richter's another writer I read in high school, you know, and his great satire. And as I got exposed to more other authors whose work I really loved, I found that my voice, or rather their voices, uh, were an influence and complemented when I was trying to find my voice or what I thought my voice was. And then and that's how, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I do write. I mean, because when you write something that's humorous or a funny narrative,
Yeah.
it's not all just jokes because the foundation is serious. Like my latest collection
Right.
of stories is about grieving. So the foundation has to be real. And it has to, and so, but it's just that the humor's there to help navigate serious situations, right? Because I think
Ah,
sometimes people think,
okay.
oh, they're being funny. It's a funny book. They write humor. That it's
Yeah.
all nothing but jokes. It's not. It's serious storytelling, but the humor comes out of the situations and sometimes puns. It
Ah,
depends. It's a mix,
yeah.
but it's a way of working that, and it's so that's where that comes from. And I, you know, and so I mean, I have tried to write like just a simply dead serious story, but there's a part of me that just no, I just
Can't do it. I don't want to do it.
well,
Not quite.
it ends up turning to something funny or satirical, and it
Oh,
just moves in that
amazing.
direction, right? So, and you know, maybe someday I will explore and see if I can go right up. But right now, I also am always thinking of my readers, and
Yeah.
for myself, two things: if I'm not enjoying it, the reader's not going to be enjoying it,
Yeah,
right?
probably not.
Right? They're
No.
not. And so if I want to invest in sitting down and writing 6 hours a day, I want to invest in something that I really want to enjoy writing.
Hmm.
Whether it's, and I think any writer will say that, whether it's
Oh, for sure.
fantasy, or they write thrillers, they write romances, or they write serious contemplative novels, or they write humor like I do. You have to want to write it and enjoy what you're
Right.
writing, because there's going to be really hard days, right? I mean, the writing, the life of a writer is a roller coaster, right? You have days where it feels fantastic,
Hmm.
days where you hate yourself, days where you think you're a rock star, days where you think, I can't ever write again. Who am I kidding, right? You go through days where you feel validated, days where you feel you're an imposter. It's
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
the whole mess, right? It is, and it is true. Um,
How do you stay like, how do you what do you take inspiration from to get through those,
those
the
days.
down, up,
Yeah.
sideways, arounds, you know?
Oh, well, part of it is reminding myself that's another day the next day. Part of it
Yeah.
is also reminding myself, trying not to take myself too seriously, take the work seriously, but not myself
Oh, yeah.
in the
You
work.
said that on Saturday, and I was like,
Because
yeah,
it's about, it's
love
not.
it.
Um, and I think I have a pretty good work ethic, and I've had that from working in the theater,
Right.
and I've always been a little bit driven. So what helps is knowing that creating anything is like 95% is the grind and it's the perspiration of it all. And 5% is inspiration. So you
Right.
need the inspiration, right? But so that when you sit down at your laptop every day to write, you know, you don't
Hmm.
sit, you don't sit. I don't anyhow. Maybe some other writers do, but the most I've talked to, this doesn't happen. But most of it, you sit down, and not every day are you sitting down going, I'm inspired. Wow.
Oh,
Most days,
never.
and when you get the inspiration and you're in one of those moments, you just got to run with it when you get it right.
Yeah.
But it's the discipline of just stepping down, sitting down every day, that your mind knows this is what you're doing, and it's the act of doing it every day
Hmm.
creates the work, and the story comes, and you keep at it, right? It's
Wow.
chipping away, right? But it's building an it's a building a discipline about committing to it. I mean, I've met many people, whether it be an actor or a musician or a writer, a visual artist, many artists that I just thought were brilliantly talented and so talented, but
Hmm.
what they lacked was a discipline and work ethic. So they
Yeah.
never, they never did record that album. They never did finish that book. They never did finish those paintings, right? They never did, go out and really pursue their acting career,
That's
because
frustrating.
yeah. And
Yeah.
what it does is it helps remind yourself to stay humble, because there's just
Right.
so many talented individuals out there,
Yeah.
and there are many talented individuals that are out there, and they're working professionally, right? And
Hmm.
they're fantastic, but there's just as many that are probably incredible, but they just haven't got the drive, or they're not willing to do the work, because if you're not willing to do
Yeah.
the work, nothing will happen. And the harder one is those people are so talented, but they just don't get the break. And
Like, no opportunity comes
yeah,
forward, kind of. Yeah.
exactly, because luck is only when opportunity meets preparation, right? They
Right.
cross, right?
Yeah.
So anyone say, oh, they got a lucky break, someone says, well, yeah, they did, something happened, but they had
Yeah.
to know they had to
Opportunity.
be,
Yeah.
yeah, because they had to be prepared when that happened. So it's those people and there's some people that that they never meet at that intersection. They just don't get that break, right?
Yeah.
And even that little one, and it's the little breaks all along the way that help, right? Those little validations that keep us
Yeah. They
going.
compound.
Yes, and they
Hmm.
keep you doing it. But as a writer, you really just have to love writing, because
Hmm.
if long as long as your number one goal, it's I just want to write, and I want to write and tell stories,
Right.
and it doesn't matter if I'm published or not. If you were honest, can honestly say that about yourself, then you'll keep on enjoying doing it.
Hmm.
But if everything is, but I get this book, and I have to win that award and do that, then eventually you're not writing for the craft, for the love of writing. You're
Right.
writing for some other thing that it's always sure. Those are great perks to have. Of course, you want to get
Sure.
published, but
Yeah.
the core is you just have to want to write.
And I think with that, it goes back to, I have a handful of friends who've tried, like, they've went to accomplish certain things, or they want to, and we all have different ways of looking at goals, because
Yeah,
essentially it's what
yeah,
they are, right? But
yep,
I think what you're talking to about more is enjoying the process of it and actually love showing up every day, love
Yeah.
like putting my imagination down on paper, love creating, and then everything else will come. But that other stuff that's going to come isn't something I can necessarily control directly, but I can control getting my ass up, hitting start on my 6 hour
Yeah.
timer, and just nose to the grindstone, right? So I think that's interesting that that's how you
You
said it. I'm like,
you
oh
you
yeah.
you nailed it, Glenn. That's the one thing we can't control. It's just sitting down, doing the writing or
Mm-hmm.
practicing your instrument or whatever it is. That's the one thing we can't control. And so
Oh,
that's
amazing.
yeah.
It's why do you think comedy? So what I've done lately is I've gone through and I've seen everything comedy is coming up a lot more, whether it be more types of humor and everything is coming more to the forefront. And I think what you said earlier too, you mentioned humor as a coping mechanism, right? And I think we
Yep.
all do that.
Yep.
Whether it's different, it takes shape or form different ways for different people, but I think we all cope the similar ways. But I think when it comes to humor now, we see a lot more comedy or comedic writing or more jokes. Everything's coming more, humor is getting pushed and pushed and pushed. I've never seen as much comedy or as much like comedy or humor, any form of writing that's come out like in the last 5 years versus before that in the last
Yeah.
decade. Like
Well,
it's way at the forefront. Comedy's right up there and everybody's like chomping at the bit to get it. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think the importance of it now is so in your face?
well, the 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 worse things get, the
Yeah.
more we need an escape, right? The
Mm-hmm.
more we right, the more we need a laugh. And things are pretty grim right now on a lot of
Yeah.
levels, right? In the world, it's in the they've been bad for a long time, but especially since 2019 and the 20 when COVID hit, right? So
Oof,
if you
yeah.
think of us human beings, we lived through 2 years of COVID and a bit on this heightened adrenaline vibration, dealing with being isolated and can't do this, and people we're working from home, and oh my gosh, and just this, we had to go back to, I think, and live with some of the adrenaline that probably we lived back centuries ago, right? As a survival tool.
Mm-hmm.
So now, as we're coming out of it, but now we have another variant coming. But we're dealing with other things in the world, right? With the
Yeah.
rise of fascism, right wing conservatism out of
We're getting
control right
so
now,
divided.
divided, right? What's just happening
Yeah.
education wise, healthcare is falling apart. We already were all as a society exhausted from getting through COVID, so our resilience is
Exhausted.
even lower now, dealing
Yeah.
with what are normal life stressors. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you're seeing the rise of humor and the need for it because it's a tonic that we need, and people need the escape of it, or they need the familiarity of, oh my gosh, watching Stephen Colbert or Trevor Noah or John Oliver. That you
Yeah.
someone who that there's some that they can take the world and they can put it through that filter. You can have a laugh. It normalizes a bit and it makes it just a little bit easier to deal with things.
Right.
Right? Because we
Yeah.
because we laugh in the end because there's just nothing else we can do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I
And
guess so. That's
right,
coping mechanism.
right, and like humor,
Yeah.
like flip coin. There's sorrow one side, laughter's on the other. Sorrow, laughter. Right? You flip it.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, okay. Now, kind of switching gears a bit, I'm curious your answer when I say just people who don't maybe aren't authors or even consider themselves avid readers or avid writers.
Okay, sure.
What is what are kind of the benefits that you've seen writing and reading provide for your life?
Oh, okay. Well, right away, reading. I get to explore worlds I am not able to travel to in my normal life. So I can go
Yeah.
back in time. I can go to different centuries. I can go to I get to go into the heads of different people
Mm-hmm.
that I and I get to see many, many different ways of what it is to experience life as a human being on this planet from all points of view, right? And what that does is I think it creates a broadening perspective of life. It also helps increase one's empathy. for things around you, right?
Yeah. Ooh.
And right, and that's so important, right?
Yeah.
And
Now more than ever.
more than ever. So I think, and I get, and that's what I've gotten from reading. And I don't know if I mentioned this in the panel this week, but I also, and it's important. I read a book. I identify with characters. I feel
Uh,
less alone.
whoa.
I feel like a little safer in the world because I relate, right?
Yeah.
And and sometimes you'll come like, I know what Salinger that did for me with the Glass family when I was a teenager. I met this fictional family in his books. It's like, man, I want that to be my family. Like I want to hang out with these characters, right?
Yeah.
And they were more real to me than the flesh and blood people in my life, right? And,
Wow.
and
Based on
sometimes
the relatability.
relatability
Wow.
and the writing really brought them to life, right? So there's that. So to me, it's all about expanding your mind about humanity, right? So and the reading, and then what I get from writing forces me to realize what my point of view is on things,
Oh.
right? Because by
Yeah.
writing humor, I write primarily in my humor. Satire is observational, right? So
Mhm.
you're critiquing the world around you, but you're also part of it, right? And sometimes
Right.
it's self-critiquing too.
Mhm.
So writing is a wonderful way to get inside how you look at the world and how you look at yourself,
Whoa.
right? And
Yeah.
finding out what do you think about these things, because uh, anything you're writing, there's a point of view there somewhere, right?
Right.
And if there isn't, an editor will tell you, so why you're writing this? What's the real reason? Why should a reader want to pick up your book and read it? Right?
Oh,
So
yeah. No kidding. What I've found interesting when it comes to what I think, to kind of add on or piggyback off what you said a bit, when it comes to writing as a skill, I think it helps define people's authenticity, or it makes it more clear of how they're unique in what ways. And
yeah,
I
yes,
found I write a lot in a sense of like journaling, not so much daily, but whenever I have like big things that I'm going through, or medium things, in the grand scheme of things, they're all
yeah,
pretty neutral, right? But in the grand scheme of things, looking at them, looking back, and kind of, it gives me a chance to control my thoughts, reflect on why these things actually trigger me, why I'm thinking the way I am now, why I even felt like this was an issue worth spending time to write down.
yeah.
And then stepping back, and like a couple months ago, I went through like this journal I had from like 2 years ago. I'm like,
All right.
wow, interesting. Okay, that's why I think this now, or that might be, and just kind of open my mind to understand more, like you said, the uniqueness, or like you empathize with, even in my case with that, I empathize with past me. And I was like,
Yeah.
huh, interesting. So I really like that. I really like that it allows you to see that authenticity and like in yourself,
Yes, yes.
right?
Because if you're not, again, it all depends what your medium is, right? It doesn't
Right.
matter. But if you're not honest with your voice, and I guess I come from the school of write what you know, right? So I
Mhm.
draw it, right? But if your voice isn't honest and it isn't real,
Mhm.
it's not going to land on the page,
No.
and no reader will read it. So you are exposing yourself. It's vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
It is, but it's this truth still is holds that in our vulnerability is our greatest strength.
Right. And I think what you were saying a few seconds ago with the how to be more empathetic, and that like
Yes,
coming
yeah,
from reading and writing, especially as a skill set, allows us to connect with people, because we can't empathize with somebody that's not like so much made up,
that's right.
in a sense of like, oh, this person's not real. So it's hard, but the character traits from
Yeah,
are brought to life. But those character traits are based off of, like you're saying, you're like, sometimes based off of me. Then that's why people are drawn to the characters, because we can see ourselves in them. And I'm like,
yes,
wow.
and
So it's
and
cool to
also,
me.
yeah, and another thing, and just reading as well,
Hmm.
it expands our vocabulary.
Yeah.
It expands and I think it improves our ability to communicate.
Oh,
Wait,
absolutely. Yeah.
you have a greater use of language to try, because we all want to try to be clear and be understood. And so the more that we have at our disposal to be able to do that, the better.
I think to your point, personally, I've found I'm able to think, not so much slow down what other people are saying, but speed up how my brain processes what other people are saying. Like, it allows me to listen at a higher octane. Whereas in the past, if I'm not reading or I'm not writing or in any shape or form, right, I just kind of sit back and I'm like, I don't, I'm like, I keep missing or I forget. And I find I retain a lot better of what people are saying as well. It's weird, but that's just kind of my experience with that. I'm
Right.
like, it allows it, my brain kind of feels more relaxed when listening, almost, if that
Okay.
makes
I'm with you. I'm with you
sense.
there. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a weird thing I've noticed, but I'm not sure why, to be honest, Rod. But I mean, it's kind of cool
Yeah.
when it works
Yeah.
out. So, but yeah. So, with all the people you've met in your career so far, can you think back of anybody or any group of people and scenario that has had like an impact on you? It doesn't necessarily have to be the greatest impact on
No,
you,
no,
but
no. There's been
yeah,
a
something like that.
lot of people. I mentioned Neil Freeman, who was my mentor at university with
Hmm.
Shakespeare, right? He was huge, and not just his incredible intelligence, but his passion for the material, but his also his humanitarianism and his sense of humor. So he really influenced me in a major way. Um, one of the greatest actors in this country, David Fox, he passed away almost a year ago now, and he was one of my best friends, and I worked together with him on many projects, but we also were really, really good friends. And
Amazing.
and in terms of what he did, he taught me about what it is to be real in the work, and playing the truth and going for the truth, and that's all that matters, and all that, and going for it, right?
Hmm.
And then also along with that, how you treat others around you, right? That it's about the work, and there's no
Yeah.
room for ego and all of that, right? It's just so he was a great mentor for me in terms of my
Yeah.
work in that aspect. Um, in terms of writing, there's been those writers like, say, David Sedaris in America, and some of the other authors I mentioned, like Salinger, who I of course I
Hmm.
didn't know personally, and but their
Right.
writing influenced me. So I think of them as being huge mentors, even though I never actually met them.
Whoa. Cool.
Right? So I think that's
Yeah.
important for people to know that you there's a lot of dead people out there too who can still be your mentor,
Yeah.
right? I mean, going back and finding that out, right? Or your muse. Who knows how it might transpire for you? Um, there are authors I've met in the just recently, who I admire for a variety of reasons, not just from their skill as a writer and their scope, but
Yeah.
just all around, like their discipline, or how they approach the work, and their mindset. So I've been recently getting my cylinders, all six cylinders, firing in a different way from being exposed to a lot of really, really interesting other writers. And that's been
Oh.
happening in the past few years, and that's been great because there's a lot of new energies coming that way,
Hmm.
into my life. Um, Also, I think, um, at this age where I'm at, I've also mentored a lot of students, right? So
Hmm.
but I'm also, now it's interesting, is where I've also got some young mentors, right? I've got a few people, friends of mine, that are now like in their early 30s, and they're mentors for me, not just in terms of like technology and such, but they're mentors for me in terms of how they see the world coming at their age, right? Which is
Oh.
really great, which is really important, right?
Yeah, that's
So
cool.
I think there's something really,
Oh.
as we go through life, is building those influencers that are older and those that are younger, so that you can get all those perspectives, right? Because the
Yeah.
last thing you want to do is grow older and be completely out of touch.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not how
Interesting.
I've never, that's not how I want to be. I just, and so I try to stay in touch, and with younger artists who I just, yeah, keep a pulse on things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Oh, that's a good answer. Jeez. When you go to these festivals and you meet
Hmm.
these people that you're either influenced by or you've read their stuff and you've connected with or related to,
Yeah.
when you meet them, what is one of the first questions you ask past the small talk? So like after the, hey, how are you? Oh my God, whatever. But what is one of the questions you ask? Like, how do you go about picking their brain?
I think invariably, because this happened at the panel this past weekend, we all went out for dinner together, and
Ooh.
invariably a question that gets asked, I think, is eventually we all start talking about our own individual process.
Oh,
Like different, right? Like
cool.
right, like how early do some get an editor involved, and how does that happen? And how do you navigate through your work? So what you find is all the common threads, the commonalities that you go, so it's almost, you can share all this when this happens, but then you also find out how everyone's different and how they go about it, right? How they get to
Oh,
that
that's
extra.
cool.
So that's what I find really interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a
then
great
so
answer.
that's the main thing I think that I ask, because I'm always curious about, right? Because
Hmm.
in the end, it all comes down to the same thing: sitting at that laptop or longhand. How do you do it, and how do you do it? How do you work it, right?
Right.
So right, so there are some authors I've talked to that I reckon, oh, our process is kind of similar. Then there are others that we don't. It's completely different. But
Hmm.
there's something I can learn from that, and
Yeah.
yeah, so that's a big one. And then um, sometimes we'll talk. We'll get talking about what were the hardest things you've had to go through, like what were the greatest challenges you've had to go through, and in sharing that, you really realize that although it's a solo act, right?
Hmm.
Writing is very much a solo act. But by asking those questions like that, you forget in some ways we're all in it together.
Hmm.
All had challenge, and that helps.
Yeah, that relatability and it.
Yeah, it's all about
Oh,
yes, about that relatability, right?
yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure that all brings you guys together as well, like a lot more as a
You
group.
know
And then,
what?
yeah.
And the writers that I've got getting to know, and the one thing that we all have in common, right? None
Hmm.
of us, no one. I mean, no one is that kind of arrogant. You know, I am the finest writer in this
Right.
country, and I don't have to talk to you. You know who I am. You know all
Yeah.
that. I have no time for that, right?
Hi, what's your name? You know my
You
name.
know my. I don't have.
Yeah.
I've sold a million books. I don't need to know your name, right? That sort
Yeah.
of thing. No, that's not no. So
Oh
that
God, no.
energy, I have no time for that. And I think most of the writers I know, they're not like that either, right?
Amazing. That's
Yeah.
kind of what you want,
Of
right?
course you do. No,
So
no, well, yeah. Well, also
yeah.
those are the kinds of writers who want to talk to me anyhow.
Perfect. Like save me the time. Let's go. So, Rod, when you're asking people about their process, whether it be the writing process,
Sure,
their creative process,
sure.
do you, what is the craziest thing somebody said that is a part of their process that's you've been like, huh, that works for you? Something like that. It doesn't have to be bad, doesn't have to be good. I'm just curious. What was something that stood out?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think. Let me think on that. Um, I've known a few actors that are very method.
Very method.
Yeah, that go into that
Oh,
live
yeah.
right. And so
Amazing.
yeah, so I mean, and I know of a few actors that I've worked with that have really gone into that, needing to live and breathe that character in their own life,
Yeah.
to a degree that sometimes seemed a little extreme, right? I mean, there's classic stories, like the Shia LaBeoufs and different things of film
Hmm.
actors, right? That they just sort of go into it and they cross the line a bit.
Yeah.
And I've seen that, and I've worked with a few actors from a directing capacity,
Hmm.
and some of those actors that go so far in that zone, they can be difficult to work with because you don't know where they are,
Yeah.
and it's like, I need you to come up for air and be on the same planet as me for a moment here, so we can at least see,
Right.
are we on the same roadmap?
Yeah, and at that point, aren't you? You're not even really working with the actor. You're now working with the character. And it's
Yeah,
like,
so
ah,
it's very important, I think, and I'm talking theater more,
yep.
is to it's important to work with people of different methodologies to challenge yourself, but in the bigger picture, make sure you, for me anyhow, I for me to make it a good experience for me, I have
Hmm.
to work with actors who I understand their methodology and they understand my approach, so that we're going to work harmoniously together on this project, right?
Yeah.
So if anytime having working with a few actors that I couldn't figure what the heck they were doing, that was one. In terms of writers thus far, there's no writer that I've met yet that has an approach that's so far out to lunch. You know, that's like, oh, I just throw
I
random
love that
ideas at my
expression.
wall, right? No,
Yeah.
I haven't had that experience. I've
The
had
words
experience.
on magnets and just,
Yeah, throw it around, and
yeah.
I'm gonna draw these from a hat, and that'll be my whatever that's gonna happen. No, I haven't encountered that. I haven't. What I have discovered is that writers have really different relationships with their editors, and when they share material with their editors, I was surprised to talk to a couple of writers who very early on
Mhm.
are sharing their stuff with their editor to get early feedback in the very early stages of it, to see if they think they're
Yeah.
on the right track, if it's workable. And I'm like, because with my writing,
Yeah.
I'll have 2 or 3 drafts done that I've done before I'm ready to send it to my editor to look at. So
Wow.
yeah, that one struck me as a little different.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Interesting. So you do those self drafts and then self reviews, and then you're just like, or do you just pass those out to friends? And then like, I got
No,
one person for the
not
first
even
draft
that
one.
much. No,
Yeah.
I don't pass them out to a lot of friends. I don't actually. There's a few people I look at it, but I work away at it and work away at it and work away on it. And then when I get to a place where I said, I can't do anything more on this now, it needs
Mm.
to go into the hands of an editor. So when they're getting it, there's always gonna be things to work on, and that's a given. But what they're getting is a solid manuscript, so that they can clearly then see, here's the notes I
Ah,
need to give you, right? Like on this latest
right.
my latest novel I'm working on, and I got notes from my editor back in August on it, and I've been since working on my next draft,
Amazing.
right? There was, observations about, and they're considerations. Consider this about your ending right now. Um, there were questions about um, the narrative voice and where I could bring the narrative voice in a few places. And then there was just a simple question about, length, saying,
Mm.
I think this book, you can afford to cut a bit of it, to really zing in the focus a bit more. And
Oh, interesting.
that's often the case, right? So,
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing.
Save
Uh,
paper.
Safe paper, exactly. It's a safe
That's
paper.
what they've been saying. Yeah.
Make the publisher happy. It's going to be
Yeah.
cheaper. Yeah, cheaper to publish, but you know, so those are notes that I understand and I can work at on the big picture, right?
Hmm.
But you're not setting work in where the editor's going, you need to rethink your entire structure, or this is overwritten, or there's so much filler in here. Where's the book?
Yeah.
No, you're not doing that, right? So right, but you by the time you're setting it in, at least for me, I feel that it is, I can't do anything more on it till I get someone else's viewpoint on it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Um, so that's kind of one of my last things I'm curious about
Sure.
in terms of how, like, my general question that I like to end the show with.
Okay.
Do you have a piece of wisdom or a
Uh,
piece of advice that you received? It could be early on or later on, that you would say has stood the test of time in your life.
okay. Wow.
And feel free to take a second.
No, I'm going to think on that. I guess two things. One is simply believe, and what I mean by that is believe in yourself, believe in what you're doing, believe in what you're creating, even on those days where you don't see like you're making progress, you're mired in self-doubt. That's
Mhm.
all part of it, right? Right?
Right.
Like courage
100%.
courage exists, right? It doesn't exist without fear. Fear is part of the equation.
Hmm.
Despite fear, you're going forward, right?
Right.
So believe, so that was something very early on, and that core belief of self, that, and that key, I think I would say that keeps me keeps me motivated and driving, right? Because I do believe, and I believe it. I believe. And the second thing is, I learned, no matter what you're doing, whether you're a musician, you're a visual artist, you're a writer, you're an actor, right? Just know that no one's going to care about your work more than you. So there'll be people that will come along the ride for some of it, like, whether working with a bunch of actors or a show, but know that no one, and that doesn't mean that's that. And so that's how it should be, because it's your work, and other people are going to be invested in it to the level they need to be invested,
Mm-hmm.
but it will always be yours. So with that, and this is something I've discovered over the years, the more I put into my creative work, the more I always get back. And it's an equation that has never failed to disappoint me.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at, I mean, but I know I've been there a few times. Sometimes I might have had a relationship in my life that maybe didn't go the way I wanted it to,
Oh,
even
sure.
though I was working on it and giving it all, but there are controls whereby that's just the way it goes. And it
Yeah.
to people that eventually weren't on the same wavelength.
Yeah, it's life.
It's life. But with your creative work, because it's what you're creating.
Yeah.
If you're investing 100% into your work, you'll get 150% back
Whoa.
if you stay committed to it, right? And
That's the big thing. I like that you added that. Amazing.
yeah, you got to stay committed to it,
Mm-hmm.
and that ties in with belief. So I guess, and that kind of that comes up with the other thing about just show up, just do it, just show up and do it.
Amazing.
Right.
Amazing. I love that. I love that answer. Oof. Amazing. All right, Rod. So I'll roll out the red carpet for you. Let people know where they can find you, where they can connect, where they can
okay.
purchase, read your books, see more of you, hear more of you.
Well, thanks. Okay, so the easiest way is, because I'm on all social media platforms. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. But if people want to go to my website, this is my author's website. It's simply rodcarley.ca. And if you go to the contact section on my website, it will take you to Instagram, Twitter, all my different media where I have a presence. On Facebook, I have a writing show called Rod Reads, that it's not every week, but it's done sporadically, where I read from different Canadian authors' works. I showcase Canadian independent booksellers.
Love it.
I highlight what people are reading right now.
Mhm.
I read from an adaptation of The Great Gatsby. My cat Hilton's writing right now, so I read from that, and I just engage in some bad book pun behavior. So that's an ongoing thing, and it's my way of spreading the love about Canadian literature. So that's on a Facebook page just called Rod Reads, if people want to sign up for that.
Easy.
And I post there, and that's where you'll find me. And then
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Man, this has been really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Glenn. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
And this conversation's flown by.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I always find they take like a couple minutes, like about 15 minutes, 15, 20 to get into the groove. But then we start building. It's like you start asking questions, I start asking questions, go back and forth. I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then you're able to pull out and like you feel connected, right? So you're like, oh, I feel more open to share and stuff. And I love it. So I'm really grateful you were able to share your story. I had a blast. And
me too. And you're a terrific interviewer.
Thank you, man. Thank you so, man.
Yeah,
Thank you
you're
so
really
much.
good.
I really appreciate that.
It's been really enjoyable. Yeah, no, it's been a really nice, easy conversation back and forth.
Man, thank you that means so much. Like, it really does.
Very much so.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Amazing. How I